That we are divided is well understood, but many people misunderstand why this is so. A Pew poll in 2017 found that the political attitudes of people haven't changed all that much since 1994. This is true of blacks, whites, men, women, college grads, non-college grads, everybody. But the negative feelings between Democrats and Republicans has more than doubled in that time. Republicans with very unfavorable opinions of the Democratic Party rose from 17 to 43% in the last 20 years, even as their ideological outlook remained more or less constant. Democrats underwent a similar shift from 16 to 38% over the same time period. So this polarization does not reflect our ideological divide as much as our subjective feelings. So much so that the majority of partisans say the opposing party's policies represent a threat to the nation's well-being, and that the other party makes them feel, quote, afraid. And remember, what we tend to fear, we also tend to hate. So if polarization is not ideological or even rational, it exists because it satisfies a deep craving to belong to a group, in part by displaying animosity toward any outsiders. This feeling has a name. It's called tribalism. We organize into in-groups and out-groups, accepting those in our group and rejecting all of those outside of it. Liking a sports team is a similar phenomenon. I love football, and I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan. While I love the state of Texas and I love the city of Dallas, I hate them Cowboys. And right now, everyone who loves the Cowboys is sneering at me, and everyone who hates the Cowboys is smiling at me, if not outwardly, then inwardly, proving the point. If you remain unconvinced, let's consider the recent example of Justin Amash, who recently announced he was moving from Republican to Independent. Although he is still one of the most fiscally conservative members of Congress, leaving the Republican Party has made him a leper in the eyes of the exact same groups who claim to fight for fiscal responsibility. Even though his policies haven't changed, he got dumped by all of his donors and supporters because he dropped that R at the end of his name. This is a great example of how the divide between us is not ideological. It's about group solidarity, identity. Them and us. This solidarity prevents us from being consistent and fair in our evaluations. On the right, group solidarity requires us to excuse Trump for behaviors far worse than we condemned in Bill Clinton. On the left, this same solidarity prevents us from acknowledging that anything Trump has done has had a positive effect on the country, and there have been positives. These tribal instincts are an evolutionary byproduct of being a social species. It's no wonder then that tribalism has been the dominant mode of social organization for humans for nearly our entire history on the planet, because it satisfies our deep need for well-being, safety, and belonging. What needs explaining is first, why extreme tribalism is reestablishing itself so forcefully now after decades of relative cooperation. And second, why our standard means of containing it seem to be failing. First, why is tribalism so heightened now? Where to begin? Decline of civic organizations has reduced our individual sense of connectedness. Stagnant wage growth for the working class builds resentment, not to mention the declining hold of organized religion. Identity politics on the left, market fundamentalism on the right, both erode our feelings of shared citizenship. Changing demographics inspire fears of economic and cultural displacement among whites. Fragmented media keeps us all in separate information bubbles. Social media platforms have created a successful business model to monetize viral outrage, to name but a few. Second, why are our normal corrective measures unable to stop our skid into tribalism? Because people are adapted for life in small, homogeneous groups, but we now find ourselves living in large, heterogeneous populations, undergoing rapid change. So, as a means of emotional rescue, we are more likely to build tribal cocoons through political polarization. It's difficult for tribalistic humans to sustain a modern liberal society, but we have historically done a good job. The Golden Rule, Locke's social contract, Adam Smith's invisible hand, Kant's categorical imperative, Mill's case for intellectual freedom, Rawls' veil of ignorance, the U.S. Constitution balance of powers, all demand that we set aside parochialism and trust our fates to neutral authorities. We now take these ideals for granted. We have shunted aside the gatekeepers that screened out unfit politicians. We have fallen into cynicism about our core institutions. In education, elite universities encourage students to burrow into their tribal identities rather than transcend them. In media, outrage and extremism are lucrative. All of this was set in motion long before Trump. Today, the road to power for any sociopath or demagogue is comparatively unobstructed, as the fail-safes designed to protect the system have themselves begun to fail. Partisan rhetoric plays on fears, and their message is plain. If the other side wins, our lifestyles, our values, our very existence hangs by a thread. But there is hope. We've seen tribalism before. In the 1800s between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. In the 1820s and 30s between the Jacksonians and the Whigs. In the 1850s between the North and South. And the Civil Rights Movement of the mid-20th century. Humans are wired for tribalism, but not entirely. As social psychologist Jonathan Haidt says, we are pre-wired for tribalism, but it is not hardwired. So how do we fight against the tide of tribalism? First, as so many of us are so exhausted by the polarization industry, we are becoming more aware that our buttons are being pushed and our brains are being hacked. So some are forming new civic efforts like Better Angels, Bridge the Divide, Living Room Conversations, and the Listen First Project. These types of organizations reduce animosity and open communication by challenging the narrative of helplessness and getting us talking again. Because we need to talk. Second, and most importantly, we need to rebuild our institutions. Our society is in need of something that it lacks, but doesn't know it lacks, which is a structure for social life, a way to give concrete meaning and identity to the things we do together. This is done through our social, political, religious, and market institutions. They are the enemy of tribalism, as they socialize people, transmit knowledge across generations, and discourage behavior that considers only self-interest. It is no coincidence that Donald Trump seeks to disempower institutions at every turn. Strong institutions obstruct that type of leader, and weak ones smooth the path to demagoguery. Rebuilding institutions is the most important thing we can do. And the two that need the most strengthening are the Democratic and Republican parties. The more they weaken as institutions, they grow stronger as tribes, whose members are united by hostility to their enemy. We are stuck using brains that aren't wired for global, fast-paced interactions. But I still have hope, because we are rational creatures, capable of analyzing and understanding the forces against us and responding appropriately. Getting traction against tribalism will require civic bridge building and a strengthening of our institutions, and recommitting to virtues like lawfulness, truthfulness, and compromise, and remembering that our differences are less about ideology and more about how we choose to look at one another. Abraham Lincoln was embroiled in one of the bloodiest conflicts America has ever known. Neighbors killed neighbors, brothers killed brothers. Even though our situation is not yet as dire as theirs was, I'm heartened by something he said in his first inaugural address. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely it will be, by the better angels of our nature. This channel is aimed at exploring how to find the better angels of our nature, but more importantly, how to do it together. Thank you.